You are listening to Arts on the Air, a bi-weekly-ish interview show dedicated to Savannah, Georgia's artists, musicians, and authors. Each episode will feature a guest in conversation about their philosophy, practice, and current projects, as well as their thoughts on the state of the arts in our community of Savannah. Our theme music is a clip of Summer Nights by the Eric Jones Trio. It's provided by our friend Mark Chesanow, who plays with the Eric Jones Trio. Hey everyone, welcome to Arts on the Air. This is Tamara Garvey, and I have the pleasure of sitting with Henry Dean today. Welcome, Henry.
Oh, welcome to you, and welcome to everybody else.
Welcome to everybody. Welcome to the show.
Welcome all.
Welcome to life. I'm talking to Henry about his artistic career in general, but specifically about a recent project he did that was centered around our recent April 8th eclipse. And his project was called Now and Then. So I'm going to read a little description from his writings about his project. Now and Then is inspired by the April 8th total eclipse. As an arts science initiative, it imagines nature and environment as unique and wonderful attributes of the cosmic whole. So you sent me a really cool document about this project. And one thing I thought was really cool is that it had started from that previous eclipse that everyone in Savannah was excited about, that August 2017 one. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about, were you interested in eclipses before even that one, or did that one just strike a lot for you?
Well, thank you. But first, I really want to thank you for for inviting me to be here and the opportunity to talk about art with you and art practice. So, so in 2017, I was doing mostly pieces which were connected to water. So I was doing these pieces where I would go out into the tidal marshlands mostly, and essentially insert these sculptures into the tides. And I will mention, just for you, maybe we'll have another chance just to remind people, but I do have a website which is henrydean.art, and then I also have this Instagram, which obviously we'll get to later, which is connected to the Eclipse project. But in 2017, I've been doing these projects which were really about time and environment and a lot of other things that we'll probably get to in terms of themes, but they were very specifically connected to nature, as in the environment around Savannah, and specifically actually close to where my house is, which is, I live between Savannah and Tybee. Okay. So there's those beautiful marshlands which are going out, to the north, to basically between Highway 80 and the Savannah River. And I had a boat and I was going out, and if anybody goes to my website, there's actually some, in the installation section, there's some documentation of those pieces. So in 2017, I've been doing this type of work for about 15 years actually. Yeah. So
were those pieces made of materials made to change and break down over time?
Well, they were. But they were very simple materials. So what I was doing was just going out. I had this really major shift in terms of what I was doing with my art practice, because before I came to Savannah, I was doing mostly. I was doing multimedia, interdisciplinary work, but mostly painting, and I was mostly selling paintings. That was the way that my art practice was essentially plein air, but before I came down to Savannah in 1999, I was doing these large format paintings, and going out into the landscape, and my work it's always sort of involved quite a lot of rigor in terms of stuff, like poles and doing big paintings. So I wasn't doing small paintings in the landscape.
Yeah, and the idea usually when people paint plein air, it's not going to be large items. Just you're setting yourself up for more arduous dragging things around.
Right, you're going out and you're doing a sketch, and then you're maybe doing photo documentation, and then coming back into the studio and doing larger format works which are based on that. So and that's a very important, I think, thing to think about in terms of, and maybe we can talk about that more, about how what is a studio practice as opposed to, what is a practice of art which is outside the studio and maybe even outside the gallery. But anyway, in 2017, I heard about the eclipse happening. Long story short, and I was just like, well, this is so cool. It's coming, it's just 100 miles from here.
Yeah, everyone in town, we were very excited about it. And it
was
pretty
did
easy.
Did you see it?
I did. I drove with friends. We drove maybe an hour or so deeper into South Carolina. And so we were basically under it. It became, we kind of pulled off on the side of the road. It became pitch black. The highway lights went on. The crickets started chirping. Mm-hmm. It was really cool. And then it passed through a few minutes later, and then the highway lights went off and the crickets stopped, and that was it.
Right. Well, that was kind of what I recorded when in 2017. That was pretty much it. So where were you in South Carolina? Do you remember?
That is a good question. I could look it up based on a photo I took of the rinky-dink barbecue place that we.
Yeah, it was probably very close to where I did my installation. Yeah, because I'm more or less I did some research about because I wanted to. I studied geography at St Andrews, so that was geography has always been a huge part of my life, and my thinking. And it's a little wonky, I think, for some people when they think of artists, they think of artists being very mysterious and it's imaginative and we often think about art in that way, but actually I think for me art is very much about it's like bringing in sort of scientific knowledge and understanding. So I'm part of my work is really about exploring the world through my art. So I sort of had a friend up in South Carolina who, he's a naturalist and he's from South Carolina, and we sat down a number of times and and we looked at maps, and I was saying, well, I want to be somewhere where the moon's shadow is going to be coming towards my installation so I can video it. And
you had really plotted it out.
I really did plot it out, but it was totally spontaneous in a sense. I mean, I think I thought about it probably, maybe it was a month or two before the eclipse happened. Mm-hmm. And then I just started doing the research and actually, in terms of some of the other projects I did in the marsh, it was much, I'd never done anything like it. Of course, I was thinking this is about light and about a very different type of time. And it's not going to be in water. So it's really going to be about air and sky and...
was your piece kind of sundial-ish? Is that...
Well, it wasn't really, although maybe you could say it was. I mean, it was because this is one of the interesting things about any kind of outdoor sculpture is that it does become a sundial. Mm-hmm. And as I was saying to somebody the other day, really actually you could stick a fork in the ground, and playfully and say it's a sculpture, but it is actually becoming a sundial. So anyway,
that's true. That's a good point. Everything is a sundial.
And actually everything is cosmos, you see, and that's one of the things, I think that was one of the things that I learned from that project in 2017 was that event. And I made a video of it, but there was a lot of things that I was doing very intuitively, I was just sort of thinking, well, so I took certain of the motifs that I was doing in my water pieces, and you were asking earlier about my water pieces, whether or not they were, whether the materials changed and so forth, and which they did, and that was very much a part of what I was doing. The actual extracted works from my marsh pieces were works that I could sell, potentially. So they were works that kind of were conceived in the studio, you could say made in nature, with some intention on my part. So designed to be in nature and designed to be extracted from nature or harvested. I use that word sometimes. But and then reconfigured, and so that they become a kind of more, I guess what you could say, a more identifiable artwork. But the installation that I did in 2017 was, it was totally, it was very immersive in the sense that the whole thing was in this incredible event, this shadow event.
That just lasts a few minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you had like a month of planning for this, the few minute event, and then however long the aftermath as well, the analyzing of it and thinking about where to go next.
Yeah, and the video actually became for me, the video was the artwork in a sense. The event was, I don't know, I think that how we look at nature is very important. So I guess that's where, I feel like our conversation can be quite a lot about that and about, how we see nature. And I think that nature is we're always aware about the way that nature is changing, the cycles of the seasons and so forth. But I think in the old days, we probably, before all of the new technology and when we were leading simpler lives, we were in nature much more. So these sort of events that were related to the cosmos, I think we were sort of living them, and we were being affected by them. We knew them.
Do you know why? I'm curious, just as this has just come up, like why suddenly between this year and 2017 there's this sort of like, not a lot, but having these two eclipses sort of a few years apart, because I don't really remember this having happened for years and years before this. Is there something going on in the cosmos that we are having these like couple of total eclipses go through?
Well, you could talk about that from a, I guess a spiritual level. Like why would there be two eclipses across North America in 7 years? If you want to say specifically why in terms of astrophysics or heliophysics, right? Heliophysics is the physics of light. There are explanations why you could say the heavenly bodies are moving in a particular orientation that just coincidentally we get these two total eclipses across North America in succession. But I think for me it's an interesting question, which is a more philosophical question of, well, how does that affect the way we think? I mean, is there something we can get out of this coincidence of the movement of the bodies of the essentially, our solar system, because our solar system is what is creating. The thing that's so interesting, it's very random, you could say. I would say it is random, although scientists can actually predict it, which is extraordinary. So there's this randomness, which is like something, I love that. I'm interested in the idea of randomness and predictability. I think that's just,
I think it's so. Like each planetary body is rotating and also revolving. So there's something that happened with the paths of various things to make it where an eclipse happens. And I couldn't remember having had one for years before this. So I just thought it was interesting just now thinking like, oh, what is it that suddenly there were 7 years apart? Are they going to start to come more rapidly, or was this just a little blip?
I think it was a blip. I think it was a blip for North America.
Okay.
And I think it was you could certainly say it was a blip for the United States. And I like that.
You were fortunate to be living here where we saw.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. So very unusual, the idea that the 2017 eclipse was basically just across North America. I think I was reading up the other day, and I think maybe the last time that happened, I think it was about maybe 200 years or something like that, where the shadow specifically just went across the United States, or I'm not even sure it was, quite the United States back then in terms of the way it is now. But, so in 2017, it came, across the Pacific, landed, hit the Pacific coast in Oregon, and then it, had this trajectory across, essentially in this, using orienteering expression, so basically east-southeast, so coming in this sort of easterly direction, but slightly going downwards and then exiting into the Atlantic off Charleston. So, but then in 2024 we have this North American event, which is sort of, because it's not just the United States now, so it's coming in from the Pacific, from the southwest, coming across, I think it was Metatlan. I can't remember, the name of the city on the coast of Mexico. But essentially, the trajectory being northeasterly.
Okay.
and you could say strangely, intersecting right over the Midwest. And
so it was like an X, basically, the two eclipses.
Yeah, if you look at it online, I mean, because it's wonderful to look at these maps, because the maps show like the path of eclipses for not just the, you can go, I mean, they know what they've been, what the path of eclipses have been for the last, 100 years, 1,000 years.
Cool.
It's really cool. And then what it's going to be.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I think this question of this blip, as you describe it, like why, I think that's part of why I did the project in 2024, is because to me it's like I had time to reflect on not just what happened in 2017, but also on, in my lifetime, in a very, I guess you could say it's fortunate time in my career, I'm able to do a second piece that, and I don't have to I don't have to leave the country. I had to do a lot more driving on the second time around.
Yeah, you did. We'll get into that. One thing, just to back up a little bit, I thought it was interesting. You talked about that your earlier art practice was like doing these large scale paintings outdoors, on site, and then it's interesting that you've transitioned over time into like creating large sculptures in the studio and then putting them outside to live their life outside. How did you transition from doing like large paintings to sort of large sculptures?
Well, it's a great question. I think one of the reasons was that I was just getting really, I was beginning to question not just what I was doing in terms of the paintings, as in going outside and making representations of the landscape in painting, but also, it was like what I was doing, although I was making, I think, beautiful artwork, I was like, well, how does what I'm doing actually reflect what I'm thinking about the landscape, thinking about nature, thinking about questions of, these big questions that we're engaged with right now, climate change and...
Like you wanted them to be more conceptual, your art.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I became very aware actually in that, like towards the time that I was living in Philadelphia, I had this, there were two things that kind of led, I guess they could say little moments. One was, I came back from this, I was out, doing it, I call them drive arounds. So in Philadelphia, I was working part-time as a carpenter, and I would just go out in my truck and go out into the western deserts, the Four Corners area, Wyoming, and I would just drive out into the middle of nowhere, basically, and set up my easel. And it was really about discovery and exploration and learning and thinking. But
that sounds incredible.
It was pretty incredible. It was a pretty incredible time. But I came back one time, and I have a friend who was a studio mate with. His name's Alan Greenberg, and he's from Philadelphia. But Alan and I were talking when I just came back. I had just come back, and he just reflected. He said something. He said, well, it's really interesting how much of what you're describing about what you've been doing is it's in addition to these paintings, so it's not, and I've been thinking about this, but that conversation, it made me really realize it's like, how can I bring in this experience of being alive on the planet Earth and being interested in nature and believing in the importance of experiencing nature for ourselves in terms of our personal mental health and spiritual health and all of these things. How do I communicate that more effectively? So I was really questioning what I was doing and kind of tired of, I love landscape paintings, don't get me wrong, and I still do it. I still do drawings, and I'm even thinking right now, after this project I've done, of maybe going back and starting to do that again, because it's going to look very different, because I've got a very different head on my shoulder. But anyway, the second thing was, which had happened actually earlier, was I had a show in Philadelphia, and I'd done this, it was sort of a monster painting. It was about, it was almost 8 feet wide, 3 feet tall. I executed it on the beach down at Cape May Point. I sold it. I mean, it was an important, because it was an incredible painting. Just, you know, and I had to create this huge rig, and you know, my carpentry skills have been very important. So like creating this gigantic sort of, I mean, really in many ways you could say like a painting studio with a, you know, constructed easel.
Yeah.
And
it's very funny that your day job of carpentry was coming in so handy for you to get done with your fine art practice. That's great.
I have a lot to be thankful for about that. But anyway, so I had this show, and these two guys came by, and they were just like, they walked by the painting, and one of them said, and they didn't know that I was the artist. I was just sort of standing nearby, and one of them was like, landscape painting, and I was like, wow, it's like they're not even looking at the painting. You know, they're not standing back from it. They're not saying what's different about this. It's just they're kind of blowing it off.
Yeah.
And so I started to, that really made me think. It's like, well, if we're living in a world where people are looking at images of landscape and not really, like, that they don't stop you. And I guess that for me is, you could say, maybe that's a consideration, is that I want people to sort of, like, for them to think about what they think about landscape through my art.
And those people, I mean, it sounds like they were really outliers, because most people, if you came across a painting that big, would have some moment of like appreciation of the work. So it almost was like fortunate for you that you came across these like incredibly unappreciative people.
Definitely, which is, I mean, we always say that, it's like when you get those kind of moments of criticism, they're, incredible learning moments. And that was a real gift. Yeah,
I think almost everybody I've ever talked to, any creative person, is like, you have some moment where either a professor or somebody said some throwaway thing to you that like really affected you, that you carried forever, and it either stopped you from making art entirely or it changed your trajectory, and that person said it and went on with their life immediately. Mm-hmm. Everybody holds inside them some criticisms that really change them.
And I think the thing, it's a great point you're making, because it's almost like, I think as an artist, I think you really have to use every opportunity of feedback as an opportunity for growth. So actually, I think, particularly nowadays, I think that's important, because there's so much creativity in many ways, in so many different ways, and many. We want as artists our work to be meaningful, and part of that, I suppose, is that that we're being appreciated. But it's difficult. I mean, we know there's people like Van Gogh, and even people who are sort of super famous, like Rembrandt, who is at the very top of his game, and then he ended kind of like a very poor person, but not broken. Still believing and still pioneering, and it's kind of incredible to think of the major art history figures that are so famous for us hundreds of years later, all over the world, and that if they were toiling in either obscurity or just getting by at the time, and then imagine that being us. Say you're working in your studio and you don't really get anywhere, and then one day you die, and say then people in your town maybe discovered you and you were a little bit famous after your death. Like, that would be one thing. But imagine that happening, and then you actually became mega famous where people studied you for hundreds of years all over the world. Yeah. It's pretty incredible. Yeah, and I think that's, why we do art. A lot of people, obviously said something along these lines, but, you don't do it for... if you are doing it for fame and recognition, it's tricky. Let's just put it that way. Because I think as an artist, you have to... I maybe I'm being a little forceful when I say this, when I say you have to, but if it's a practice, if it's something that you're, that's an ongoing part of your life, you have to be thinking about what you've done and where it's going, and even if you have a success, that success isn't necessarily going to produce a success next time around, and I think I was quite fortunate when I started off my artistic practice, because actually the first exhibition I ever had in my life was in London, And it was, you know, I mean, I guess I had never had an exhibition before, you know, and I was sort of self-taught, so I hadn't gone to school I hadn't done studio art, so I suddenly realised I was definitely an artist, and I committed to that.
You just, in your spare time, just started like painting?
I had a kind of an epiphany, and I suddenly realised, I thought I was going to be directing, I thought I was going to be a director, and then I suddenly realised all of my time I was spending drawing, looking at paintings, thinking about art, and I hadn't really considered the fact that I was a visual artist, because no one had really encouraged me, and you know, and it's all okay. But anyway, after that, I was like, okay, so I'm going to do this. And I had studied the history of art and aesthetics when I was at St Andrews. So I had a joint honours degree in fine arts and geography, which was somewhat unusual. So I knew a lot about art. My first exhibition, I sold, I think it was, 60% of the artwork in it. And it was a pretty nice gallery in, central London. So we had a second exhibition the next year, and I sold nothing. Again, one of those things where, I think the lesson was I'd started to change some of the work because I was growing. So I was, developing working with new materials, evolving ideas. But it was just it just fell flat.
That's so funny. That's so much like bands that have a huge first album and then there's so much pressure. How do they follow it up? Do they keep going in that same vein, or have they evolved a little bit and they changed? And
so
people are always going to criticize whether you do the same thing or whether you change a lot. Like, you're never going to please everybody.
So what is as somebody who's as an artist yourself, what do you think? What's your opinion about that? You must know. I don't know, say a lot about that. Do you think about that in terms of?
Yeah, I guess. Well, now that I've been. I've been out of SCAD for 16 years now, so it's a lot of time to have been doing art. So I have had sort of different periods, different series I've gone through, different focuses, and different even one particular medium that I was always working in. During COVID, I changed and I started doing bigger things, and I changed my medium. And so, yeah, I guess it has been interesting to be personally someone whose art has changed over time, and I'm hoping that there's some kind of seed in all of it that runs through it that could always be recognizable, whether it's just my use of color or sort of the sense of humor and the absurdism of it. So sort of both a visual aspect of it and a little conceptual aspect, that both of them is a little path that runs through all of them. But yeah, recently I have a new series, but I did really different things where I had old watercolor paintings sitting around in my studio that I hadn't loved all of them. And I kind of tore them up and cut them up into pieces and then just reconfigured them as collages. So the parts of them that I liked, I would collage into something different. And then Rob Hessler actually interviewed me about this, and I said that I had been a little nervous putting them up because I kind of hadn't been showing them around a ton as I worked on them. And I liked them. And then I was done and I framed them, I hung them up, and I thought, oh God, what if I'm kidding myself and they're crappy and everybody will hate them? There's a little bit of that where as an artist, it's you can do as much as you want. You could do for yourself and never show it to anybody and be satisfied. But yeah, if you're doing it for a living, then you have to put it out there at some point.
You do, yeah. It's tricky, yeah. Well, that's great. Because what you're describing is, to me, is sort of being fearless. In terms of this is what I'm going to do, and not worrying about what's going to happen, what the reaction is going to be. It's a little nerve-wracking. And I guess one thing to comfort myself, and the way maybe you meant for your second show, is that you had just started a new medium and then you put up this show, and so maybe that wasn't even the best iteration of them, the fact that they didn't sell, but maybe you were still going and you were new in that medium or whatever you had changed. So a transitional time going into something else. Who knows what'll transition after this? It's an interesting little, another little blip. Right.
In someone's career.
Well, I think, the other thing that's so wonderful about being an artist is it doesn't really matter what you're doing at any moment. In terms of craft, if you're really dedicated to that idea of excellence in craft, which is something I definitely, I think that's, that's certainly been a lot of work for me, is that, making sure that whatever I do, I think is the best in terms of its craftsmanship. Sometimes the ideas, possibly are not fully, understood by, in terms of intentional, thoughts about, this is what the work is about, which in itself is a very complicated thing, because sometimes you go through times in your life when, things are just confusing. So, you're not going to make work which is, you might make work which is expressing some sort of confusion, but you don't want the work to be confusing.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think, craftsmanship is really, it's sort of that level, it levels things so that you're always kind of, in a sense, tempering emotion a little bit with this idea of craftspersonship.
It's kind of wild, because there's not a lot of professions or careers where someone might be in any kind of phase themselves personally, and then their work is going to be public for everybody to see. Like if you work in an office and you're kind of toiling away at your accounting, right, and you go through a hard time personally, nobody out in the world is going to see this period of your accounting work. Right.
You hope not, maybe. Might not be good for business.
Anyway, I kind of wanted to get back to do this project, you were on a furlough, a hiatus from SCAD, from being a professor, or? So,
I guess in probably about 3 years ago, so we're, obviously we're in May 2024, I had started to think about that I wanted to do, and it was probably earlier, it might have been almost immediately after doing the project in 2017. To be honest, I try, I wouldn't, this is not, I'm not trying to write the art history of Henry Dean here, so I'll keep some things vague, right? So, but definitely 3 years before, roughly the 2024 eclipse, I'd started to realize I really wanted to do something connected to the eclipse. And so I started to study it in terms of its path. And one of the first things that I discovered was actually that the path of totality was actually going to go over where my mother was born in Maine.
Oh.
So my mother was born in a place called Holton, which is up in Aroostook County, and my ancestors went up there in the 1800s and actually, I think, co-founded the town. And so, from childhood, I've been going up to, it's called the county because it's one of the largest counties, I think, certainly the largest county, I think, in Maine. But it's this huge area up in the north of Maine. Most people, when you say Maine, they're really thinking about the coast, Mount Desert Island, Kennebunkport, all of these places, Portland. But there's this incredible landscape up in the north which sort of sticks up. And Holton is it's, I guess, the original county seat. And it's, my family have been there for a long time. And when I was a kid and we were living in New York State, we used to go for holidays up there, and my grandfather built a cabin, on this lake, Meduxnicate Lake. So, it's, and my mother was born there, so it's kind of like, wow, it's like, that's kind of, that's interesting.
Right, what are the odds?
Yeah, and, my mother has passed on, so I was thinking a little bit about the fact, well, I want, I suppose in some ways, thinking about honoring her memory, I suppose, so, there was a thought, well, I could do an installation up in Maine, and that would be sort of, kind of in a sense, like bringing a circle back around in some ways. And so, and then I, started thinking a little bit more about it, and then this idea presented itself to me, which was, okay, so what is it about the eclipse what does it mean for Henry Dean in the sense of, other than the fact that it's going over Holton, and you've done something in 2017, in Ellery, South Carolina.
Yeah. You're calling attention to the eclipse. What exactly are you saying? What are you trying to make out? And
actually at that point, I think I guess I should, say quite clearly in terms of our conversation is that, now and then is not about the eclipse. And it's something that took me a little while to actually understand as I was talking to people over this time of this project, which is 2 or 3 years, and developing a statement of purpose and essentially selling the concept to various people, including the place where I work. which is, as a long-term professor at SCAD, and understanding that if I was going to do this thing, I was going to have to. It was going to be a collaboration, a big collaboration.
Yeah.
It was going to involve a lot of people, and it wasn't going to be about me. So it's going to be my work, my effort, but it's going to take a huge team, and I'm going to have to be meeting a lot of people, and so I started to develop a proposal, and I sent you the PDF. That PDF is probably about the 25th PDF that I've created. So I, constantly having to rewrite this thing. But about 2 years ago, I approached people, in my, in the university, and started to ask them whether or not there might be an interest in me, in me doing this, and whether or not I might be possibly given an opportunity to have time off. So extremely grateful for the fact that 2 awards I got. So one was 2023 Presidential Fellowship Award, and then I also got the Sabbatical Award in 2024. Oh. And the Sabbatical Award was huge because essentially what I was being given was permission to take the whole of the winter quarter off of this year. So anyway, that's, and I have had huge support. I cannot express how, at this point, it is kind of I'm beginning to understand an achievement, but, for a lot of it has just been, this is what I want to do. These are the ideas that I'm trying to communicate, which are a lot about people and about community and about honoring landscapes and about expressing a wonder for nature.
Yeah. Shared experience.
Shared experience,
across the country.
Exactly. So tying communities together. So, a lot of the things, and I guess we'll probably be talking about this in a minute, but a lot of the project, I didn't really know how many installations or locations that I was going to be doing this at. Yeah. So it's really been a work in progress, and I didn't really have any guarantees, which is, it's if you have an idea, you're going to do something like build a series of sculptural installations, have an immersive type project that's going to tie these landscapes together in a line. That's a lot of work, and so really in many ways, I've just been focusing on getting the job done.
So it's been an entire 2 years basically of planning.
It has.
Since spring of 2022.
Right, and building, I built the sculptures over the last year.
And it looked like, I saw you, it was 6 chosen locations and it was 15 total sculptures, is that
correct?
Right? Okay. Yeah. How did you pick the 6 places? Are they kind of like evenly spread out across the country?
It's another really great question, which actually kind of came up quite a lot when I was doing the project. Actually, finally, it's like people would say, "Well, how do you get locations?" It was really kind of I 2022 in the summer, my break, summer break. I went up to Maine, and I drove down the zone, the path of totality in sort of the opposite direction that the moon shadow was going to pass. So I got from Halton, Maine down to Cape Girardeau in southeastern Missouri, which sort of became, and I was just calling ahead. So what I would do is it was like museums and, when I arrived in places, I went to a couple of, I met presidents of the chambers of commerce, various places.
Like the local government.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, so it's just like I was, in a sense on this journey of exploration, but also essentially making a pitch, which is, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
At that time, I didn't, in 2022, I didn't really have a clear idea of what it was going to look like. So I was really just finding locations, which I think some people might be like, wow. So it wasn't like I went with like a drawing of like, this is what the sculpture is going to look like.
Yeah. You had to work, it was so early to get the locations lined up that it was before you had hard and fast.
Yeah, I was still working on the design. I was still working in some ways in terms, I guess you could say, refining the concept, because the design of something, the look of the work is part of its meaning, And, I'd started off with ideas that, there was going to be a lot of community involvement and engagement. And I had these ideas of, I'll get together, communities, and they'll build something, and I'll kind of come up with a strategy. So that was, and I actually, until, I guess it was around September or, October of 2022, I was working on an idea, and then right around, I guess, Thanksgiving of 2022, I just suddenly realized that everything that I'd been doing in terms of design was not going to work. And then suddenly I had this thought, which was that, okay, so you've been doing these sort of tripod-based rigs, in the marsh. Maybe it's smart to do those same things because they're fairly easy to construct, and I suddenly came up with a motif of what to actually, the decorative elements, I guess you could say, the basic shapes.
Like you knew from experience that was stable.
It was stable. It was something I could do quite quickly.
Yeah.
So, that was huge. Once I got that, then I knew kind of more like, okay, so I need to start working on evolving those designs. But then I still had to do the southern part.
So this is interesting. So you, in 2022, when you're in Maine and you are calling ahead and saying, hey, I'm going to be coming on a road trip through your town. Do you want to meet with me? I'm going to be doing a project 2 years from now. I don't know exactly what it'll look like.
I didn't say that last part.
Yeah, can you sit down and talk to me?
No, you don't say things like that. No, this is all about, it's about selling, and it's about knowing what you, I'm an experienced, I've taught for, so you learn, it's very complicated because, making a sales pitch, it is about being clear, and it's about getting people excited. It's called an elevator pitch and everything, and getting people to buy into it, and having a track record helped.
Yeah.
So I could attach my resume, and my resume shows clearly that, I've been practicing as an artist for a long time, and I've done quite a lot of nice work.
It still is, that's very brave. You're just cold calling on these chambers of commerce and museum officials, and
right.
I'm saying, I'm an artist, I'm driving through, can you meet with me?
Right, and and then of course some people are like, because a lot of people actually at that time didn't even know about the eclipse. It was really interesting, and some people did, and then some people, like in Vincennes, Indiana, which was actually the first place where I got, kind of confirmation. I went there, and that was in 2022, and I went there, and the guy that I met, who is this, there's actually a pair of gallery, they're a husband-wife team, and they own a gallery in Vincennes, but they told me that that they'd heard there was this first meeting about the eclipse, and the entire meeting was about security issues. So it was, so in some ways I was coming in. For some people it was like, well, art, it's like we're not worried about art. We're worrying about how we're going to have if 30,000 people show up, because 2017 had showed everybody what was going to happen. You see, so and. Anyway.
So this town was bracing itself for a ton of people to come to
Correct.
Town to watch that?
And actually that's one of the interesting things about the Midwest, is the Midwest in 2017 had this experience, and they knew what was going on. There's this very famous story. I don't know whether it's true. I still haven't checked, but there was a story about some place in Wyoming that was, population of 100, and, over 100,000 people showed up or something, So,
Wow.
There was a lot of knowledge about the fact there was this sort of growing interest. And that's when the whole thing about this sort of, as you say, this sort of blip, this coincidence of these two events being so close together. And the Midwest is where these lines intersected. So I didn't know this.
So that's where they had the direct experience with how big it might be.
So when I came down, it was interesting, driving from, and I didn't know this. I stopped, I stopped at a lot of places, Burlington, Vermont. I stopped at, I thought that was, I spent about four days there. I really wanted to do a sculpture on the edge of Lake Champlain, because partly it's across from New York State, which is where I grew up, and the Catskills, I think it's the Catskills are.
Yeah.
And then meeting people, and the art world's very peculiar, because the other thing about the art world is that if you're doing something that doesn't really register in the fact it hasn't really been done before, one of the things about the art world is, you know, people don't necessarily jump up and say, oh, this is wonderful, it's a new concept, you know, it's like...
People are a little wary of the new.
Yeah, so that was something I had to work with. So in some ways, I mean, I've been working with lots of different people. I mean, some people who are in the art world, the institutional art world, some people who are like down in Del Rio, which was, you know, my second trip, which was at the, I guess, when I was going up to actually build my first installation in Vincennes, which was in the spring of 2023, I drove out to Del Rio, Texas, because I wanted to do, I didn't know how many installations at that point, how many I was going to do. I had about 2 or 3 maybe. Mm-hmm. But I really wanted to have bookends, you know, and not just, I mean, you know, I mean, for many reasons, conceptually, I wanted this to be about a whole, like showing we are a whole.
So the extremes of the country, basically.
Right,
both
exactly. Yeah. We're gonna make sure that this project is showing
how wide it was.
How we are a whole. We are a country border to border.
Yeah.
And that actually we are existing in the space of the world.
And how long, so I know like here, you know, it comes through, it's maybe 5-10 minutes. How long for the whole eclipse to go from one end to the other end of the country? How many hours was
Well, it was about 2 and a bit hours.
Okay.
In terms of that, in terms
so
of
fast.
Yeah, so I mean the shadow is moving at about 1,000 miles an hour, and it's 2,300 miles long from Del Rio, Texas to Holton. So Del Rio, Texas is right on the border of Mexico. Villa Cunha is just across the border. I mean, I had certainly dreams about, you know, doing something in Canada and something in Mexico. And actually people have said, you know, maybe you should do something now, almost like because Now and Then is not, as I said, it's not really about the eclipse, it's about the eclipse being a manifestation of nature.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's still happening. And actually, if, as you know from 2017, right, you're still thinking about what you experienced in 2017. So that's why I call it Now and Then. Because to me, it's about this, you know, we're living in a time when we're beginning to understand quantum more, you know, like the past, the present moment, and then the future. So, I mean, then is, you know, it could be future, it could be past, and then the now is just an instant in a way. So
yeah, I like this idea that it's about, you know, about the community and the shared experience. So you expanding into both Mexico and Canada is kind of a beautiful way to transcend these sort of like nationalistic borders and tie in even more people together.
Right. I mean, in a global, people have, you know, been saying, well, are you going to do other works to connect with the eclipses? And I don't know. I mean, I know that I think there's an eclipse in 2026. I think it's going through across from Spain to Morocco. But I do think
that'll be a fun trip.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the idea of, I've always wanted to go to Morocco, you know, I've been to Spain. But I do think that, you know, that nature is teaching us that we are part of a whole. And I think that one of the challenges we're in right now is that we're spending so much time in this virtual reality, which sort of takes us away from being like you and I sitting here across a table and you know, just human experiences. I mean, we can communicate and do everything through the internet. You know, we're very, very adept that way, but we're sort of geared. I mean, so much of the way we perceive things and our expertise, I guess you could say, as animals, is about communication, about sharing, and about community.
Also, this whole beginnings of it, where you had to drive across the country and cold call people and meet with them, is it's like an old timey, like a encyclopedia salesman.
It is. You could say it's very old world. Thanks for. I mean, I totally agree with you.
Like an old communication, right?
It is. Yeah, like sort of almost sending out smoke signals. You know, I'm coming, and you know, and
I'm coming through town.
That's right.
Yeah. Did you so for each site, did you build each piece in that town, or did you build them here and then drive it over?
So the first piece I more or less built entirely in the town, which is in Vincennes, and it was 18 days, and It was extremely demanding. I had one piece that I designed where I'd actually done it's called a cartoon. So when I went to Vincennes, I had one thing on this very large sheet of tracing paper that showed the design. So I knew that that's what I was going to make. But I knew that I was going to make 3 sculptures on this location, which is Fox Ridge Nature Park, which is a wonderful, really amazing rewilded golf course. So at that point, it was just kind of learn as you go. So I'd done a mock-up in my yard, which is kind of a wonderful little thing, which is just a kind of life-size sketch. So I knew how I was going to put this together, and then I did it. It was 18 days. It was very complicated. And, thank goodness I had, as I said earlier, much support in terms of, there's a group of artists who essentially allowed me to share a studio with them. And, but it was very, a lot of it was just like unknowns, which is a little bit more stressful. So after that, I was like, okay, I know what I need to do now. I need to get the designs absolutely done in my studio.
Yeah.
And then I need to fabricate the essential components, which is the tondo, which is the round shape with a. So basically, at that point, I was doing really advanced like top level, if I can put it that way, research and development, where the exact template was created on paper in my studio on the walls, and then I would manufacture or fabricate the essential components and then drive to the locations with the essential components, which are essentially were the round bits, the tondo.
And we'll post on the Facebook post about this. We'll do definitely photos of this so everybody can see. But they're a little bit like wagon wheel-ish.
Yeah,
right?
You could say that, or wagon wheel, or people
shape.
said flowers or flying birds or starbursts. They have. And actually, it's interesting I'm glad we're sort of talking a little bit about the meaning of the work, because the meaning of the work as a project, as the whole now and then project is one thing, but the actual sculptures, for me, they were in some ways the thing that kept me going. It was very exciting because each one was an evolution. So as they went forward, they changed. Their basic shapes were the same, but they started to have different, I guess you'd say, design elements that were based on, as things went on, I started to incorporate more references to the local landscapes, to the history of the places that I was doing the work in, the people. So, like, for example, in Bloomington, I worked with this guy who, he's an amazing guy. His name's Mike Chitwood, but he's a naturalist and he just knows a bunch about a lot of things. But he also had done this thing where they excavated some bottles out of a bottle dump, and they collected it because it was part of an academic research project. And he had said, if you want, you can incorporate some of these bottles. And I was just like, so that was an idea. Like, he presented me with the material, and he said, if you want, you can use them somehow. And it was just like, thank you.
And that's honestly, and like, excavated bottles is such a folk art kind of sculpture anyway. Like, if you go to Howard Finster's Paradise Garden, I feel like these old like Coke bottles is like a common thing people put in outdoor sculptures.
Yeah, so that was one of the unique things about the pieces that I did in Bloomington. And then
did you in a few other places you had like a local ceramic artist?
So that was twice. So as things went along, I had more time to be able to work, to kind of develop those type of collaborations, because they take a lot of time, and that's definitely one of the things I learned in my project.
And it's interesting, I feel the earliest ones are like you're working out the kinks. So by the time you get to the last cities, they're like the best, they're like built the best, maybe the most elaborate. It's kind of funny.
Well, I think they're certainly more elaborate. I'd like to think, I love the piece that I did in Vincennes. They're so, it's interesting, Vincennes, and actually because of the nature of the project is the Midwest, I was traveling up and down. So I kept on revisiting every time, I'd do one project. I would go up and I would see the other projects in the Midwest. So Indiana, I had three locations. Indianapolis, Harrison Center for the Arts, Bloomington, and then in Vincennes, and then Cape Girardeau, which is in south and eastern Missouri. They're all within 300 miles.
Okay.
So there's 4 within this cluster, which you were asking earlier about.
Yeah.
So there's this cluster in this place where the 26.
Yeah.
And that wasn't. I mean, I didn't really think about that until at least halfway in 6 months ago. I started to realize it's like there's a reason for this, and it's a pretty good thing, because actually the shortest distance from me to anywhere along that path of totality is the Midwest.
Yeah.
The shortest distance basically.
You physically you gave yourself a little bit of an advantage there, just getting around.
Totally.
And you had there was a SCAD student who was helping you build.
Yeah. So Justin Kuhn, who I think he was in one of my 3D design classes, maybe in 2005 or something like that.
Yeah.
And Justin and I have worked together, after he graduated, he went and he did his MFA in painting up in Yale, but he now lives in not in Appalachia, but Asheville. And he had actually worked with me installing one of my pieces, I think one, maybe 2, but certainly one of the video pieces I did in the marsh, which I call Lauerkuhn, which was actually the first video installation I'd ever done, which was around, it was sort of inspired by the Greek myth of Lauerkuhn, but it was really about there was an oil spill on the Savannah River, so I was sort of utilizing a Greek myth to express, I guess you could say, some ideas about environmental goings on and catastrophe and such. But anyway, Justin worked with me on that. So he'd said that he wanted to do something. So he helped me with the piece that I did up in Maine, which was a very short window of time that we had to do it in. And I basically had to drive up and then drive back. And the level of planning I've had to do is a lot of this has been about really developing incredibly refined planning.
Yeah. Because
you cannot, I couldn't have done the project if, of course you always have to think about what's going to happen if X, Y, or Z is unexpectedly happening. But
it's so interesting that it was almost exactly 2 years of planning for the event that you said happens, 2.5 hours long.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm not there, so that's the thing. With the actual event, it was so interesting because people say, well, where are you going to be? I didn't know where I was going to be until probably about 4 weeks before the actual event, and I was sort of punting on it because I wanted to try and make sure there were video recordings of each of the installations, which is very difficult. It's one of the most difficult things. There's only one that I didn't get, which is the one up in Maine.
So you had to plan with someone to be your on the ground video.
Correct.
Report,
yeah, and it just took and I'm very happy I was in Bloomington, but Bloomington I wasn't able to secure a videographer, and Maine was another 900 miles, and I just finished the last installation I did down in Texas. So actually the planning of when I did the installations was all about seasons, and The one that I did in the hardest in terms of weather was probably in Indianapolis, because that was in early January of this year
Are any of the pieces now going to go into those local museums along with the video of them?
Well, that's a good question. I think some of them might. Some of them I've already gifted to the community. So one of the most wonderful early things that happened was that, and this was up in Holton, was that there were 2 major locations I did up in Aroostook County. One was in Presque Isle, at the University of Maine, Presque Isle, and then the other one was on the reservation of the Holton Band of the Maliseet Indians. And I have a cousin who lives up there. His name is David Putnam. And David is an archaeologist and geologist, and we're very close, so he's a second cousin of mine. But he's done a lot of work with the Native American peoples up in this area, because it's a very interesting area, Maine, because a lot of the Native American people, even though that they experienced these terrible hardships and they were dispossessed of their land and all of this stuff, they weren't, a lot of them through just history, you know, I guess you could, the circumstance of history, they still remain there. I had the fortune to be able to, you know, David was able to introduce me to the Holton Band of the Maliseet Indians, and I met twice, once in, I guess up in 2022 in the summer, and then, you know, David said if you want to do an installation, I think that maybe the Holton Band of the Maliseet Indians might be receptive. It was a really big question. But he said, you'll have to come and you'll have to essentially present. So I went up there, you know, I drove, that was in spring of 2023. So I went from Del Rio and I drove right the way up to Maine. And then I had this meeting with the chief of the Holton Band of the Maliseets, whose name is Clarissa Sabatis. And with David, you know, because he was part of it. So, you know, David said that, you know, you'll just have to ask permission. And so at some point in the conversation, I said, so, you know, Chief Sabatis, would you give me permission to do an installation here? And she said yes, which was, you know, I mean, what opportunity, you know, what an incredible gift that was. And it's interesting, my project is, you know, each installation has involved a very different type of, I guess you could say, arc of development. One of the most amazing things about this project is I haven't had to go through hoops a lot in terms of saying, you know, this is exactly where a sculpture will be placed, you know. So in Maine, I mean sometimes it was more like I would have to go through that process, and then in Holton, which is the Holton Band of the reservation of the Holton Band of Maliseet is just outside Holton. That was very much like, you just choose a place. So I did 2 sculptures on opposite sides of the Medunsticate River, but I was totally free, which was kind of amazing. I mean, and a sense of responsibility. It's like, you know, so that was different. And then down in Del Rio, it's interesting, on the other end of the path, I was hoping to do an installation on national park land, but that was a very involved process, a lot of actually back and forth, and then we had to do a special use permit, and then at the last minute it was declined because, you know, it was involving, like, I had to put concrete footings in, and there was sort of some reasons were given for that. But fortunately, I was always doing plan B, plan C. So when I went down, actually when I literally drove down to Texas, I didn't know, I knew I wanted to do a second location and I had an idea of where it was, but I had a meeting the day after I arrived with city officials at 8:00 in the morning, and I said I would like to do one sculpture here and one over there, and they said yes.
Okay.
I mean,
so you had a happy ending after all.
Happy ending, yeah.
So you think in general, do you feel like you had a lot of like tricky things you had to overcome and a lot of like roadblocks, or did things kind of go pretty smoothly? I think they went pretty smoothly. It's pretty cool, considering how much, like how far in advance, and then planning for people during the event, and then taking care of things after that they're still there. So, you know, it's just like a lot of time, a lot of stages of talking to people and so many people, and for it to all go pretty smoothly is amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of it's having an idea that's really, you know, that you really believe in. And, you know, in some ways, I mean, at some points in the project, I was like, you know, if I only end up doing 2 installations or 2 sculptures, you know, that's so kind of in a sense going with the flow. Yeah. You know, and I mean, I think that's one of the great things about nature is it does teach you, you know, it's about risk and about vulnerability and about, but also about learning and understanding, you know, understanding the way things work. In some ways, I mean, including unpredictability and, but people, I mean, people have just been incredible.
I mean, even you, I mean, just doing this thing, you know, it's like...
Thank you. I am incredible, thank you.
You are. And what you're doing is incredible. You know, we're all part of a whole here, so...
You really, you bit off a huge project for your first one, to be like going outside of Savannah and pitching to people. It was like a vast project to just jump right in on.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Which was, I mean, you know, definitely a lot of what I was doing in there. I mean, we were talking earlier about, you know, you were saying about how in your work, you know, the idea of the thread, you know, between your work, and I mean, so I mean, I am able to sort of look back and think about a lot of what I was doing, you know, back in the 1990s, and also, you know, these marsh pieces. I mean, how much they helped me, you know, it's just basically training. Yeah,
we all we're steadily marching through our lives and through our art practice. Are you back to teaching at SCAD this quarter that we're in now, or?
I'm going to be starting again in the summer. Okay. Looking forward to that.
Are you?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. It's been amazing. So because I'm on break right now, so I've just been, everything for the last 2 years has been really about this project.
Yeah.
And also teaching, obviously. So I haven't had a lot of time to reflect in some ways. So actually, the last few weeks have just been recuperating, and I have some opportunities which I think are coming up. I think that the project has opened a lot of potential doors, and I met some. Yeah. So I've met really amazing people, naturalists and business people, and starting to think a little bit more about how I can use what I've learned, in a sense, to be maybe more active, in, I guess you could say, the national scene, because this is a national project I've done. I didn't really set out to, with that in mind, because I didn't know how it was going to turn out. But
it's very cool of you. It's like ostensibly about this one eclipse, but you said that was just like your way of focusing on people looking at nature and the cosmos and the environment and tying the whole community of the U.S. together. So it is just like a jumping off point for you to take it larger, and the pieces, it's like the actual sculptures and then the videos documenting it. Things can be in science museums, they can be for elementary school children to study. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities for just community education.
Right, and as long as they're in those locations, I mean, people are walking past those sculptures, and they're I mean, I call them memory markers, but the idea that I mean, I think we have talked quite a bit today about the idea of memory, and about the way we remember and the way we process memories and move forward with what we're learning. So I mean, to me, one of the wonderful things is that those sculptures are out there. It's called ephemeral art, so some of them, I'm not sure that I'll necessarily be going back and retrieving them, but I would like to, and I'm hoping that like in Del Rio, one of the pieces is gifted to the Casa de la Cultura, which is this beautiful, wonderful, incredible art center. Texas is really amazing. I mean, I got to say that. I mean, every place I've been to is amazing, and every place. I mean, the communities. They were, this is the weird thing, is that the communities were engaging in the eclipse, not just as a commercial event, but I came to realize that actually what's happening, I think maybe I can say that, one of my thoughts is that we're becoming, as a culture, we're becoming more aware of the power of nature and the importance of engaging with nature. And it was interesting, I don't know whether the recent Northern Lights event.
Oh yeah.
I was out in Tybee the second night that was maybe going to happen, or it didn't happen that night. There was a huge number of people down on the beach.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I think that we're beginning to realize how, we've got to connect with each other, or, because that's the way we're going to make, changes that actually are constructive.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for ages, that we're hitting a breaking point of climate change. So,
well, and also
it
cultural
takes these
change.
vast outreaches for people.
So, are we close to ending our conversation?
I mean, it's been so fascinating talking to you. I've loved talking to you. But yeah, if you have some final thoughts or...
Well, no, I mean, I'm curious actually, do you have any thoughts? I mean, in terms of, I'm, reflecting on what you're thinking about, like, I mean, what the project might look like to you in terms of how it's, I mean, what it is, I mean, or anything, or just what you think about nature, I don't know.
I guess what I really like to think about for your project is, like you said, that it was ostensibly just about this one event, but the cool thing about it is it can be expanded to be, like you said, more geographical areas. It can go on for longer in time. It can be about different environmental events that are going to happen, and just the opportunities for like the community getting together at the site to talk about it, and then ongoing. I feel like just education for the public and for kids in each of these different communities is just a very cool opportunity for it. Yeah. And for you to keep going back, like keep traveling around, going to different places. And now you can show like, this is what you've done so far. So like you said, it just makes it easier to go forth and expand the project and pitch to more and more people, because you have this document of what you've done before. It could become this like,
Well, it can also, I think, for some people, I mean, I guess they can use, it's not like it's unique. I think there are people who are doing, art and environmentalism, like in Savannah, there are, there's the Coretta Foundation, there's the Savannah River,
there was the project of painting on the drain covers.
Correct.
To educate people to not, throw their leaves and other items into the drains.
So, I mean, art has so much that it can do, but I mean, I think the idea of, if you think about it, it's so kind of funny in a way. I mean, that path of totality, in terms of from Mexican coast all the way up to Newfoundland, I mean, it's more than 2,300 miles. But all the people that were on that path of totality, and a lot of those people, I mean, millions of people were just living there. So I mean, it was really funny when I mean, I would say, people would say, well, what is going to happen to the works during the eclipse? And I was like, well, I don't really know, because I'm not going to be there. I'm designing them partly with this idea that they're experiencing the eclipse. They're there, and so they've been under the eclipse, but. All of these people, saying, I'd say, well, where are you going to be? And they'd say, I'm going to be on my front porch, So I think, and there's lots of people who came into the path of totality to experience it. So there's a lot of people who've had this really big experience, and what are they going to do? I'm kind of curious about that, it's like, where are they going?
I suddenly thought it was funny, I guess, at each of the 15 pieces or at most of them, you had a videographer, like, videoing the piece. It would have been funny to have a little camera mounted inside the piece looking out at the people around it, and videoing them looking through their viewfinders at the eclipse.
Well, I mean, my Instagram, I'm hoping that maybe some people were there at the locations, and maybe they'll upload them to the Instagram is at Now and Then Eclipse 24. So I mean, if I was to go off planet at this point, I mean, it's like it has a life, I think that, I think the thing that's so impressive is just how dedicated so many people are to communities, and in some ways, my success is completing the project is entirely due to all of those people.
Yeah. But you were only in one place, so all of the other places, they were putting it on themselves, basically.
Right, and all of the places that I never, visited, or I visited, and and I'm going to at some point get back to the people that that it didn't work out, and just say what happens in your location, So the thing is, it's a continuity. It's it's not just a linear continuity. It's a time, which is a hard thing to think about, but I think we're beginning to understand that more. The way that we're all connected and about being positive, because it's like a lot of the narrative, particularly through the media, is about, how dreadful it is and how catastrophic it is, and which is
dividing people and pitting them against each other.
Right, yeah. Because climate change happens, and we've done what we've done to the planet. We have to change ways that we behave that's going to involve a lot of sacrifices, but a lot of really people coming together and coming up with their own solutions and
some large themes.
Large themes.
Fighting off the biggest themes possible.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Henry. This has been fabulous. I'm sure everybody's going to find this really interesting to think about. And so we have a Facebook page. If you can look up Art on the Air on Facebook, and I will post photos and schematics from Henry's project. But thank you. This has been Henry Dean.
Well, thank you, Tamara. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you very much as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.